In the latest episode of the podcast, Dolly Parton's America, Jad Abumrad talks about what happened to him when he interviewed the singer about her upbringing in the mountains of eastern Tennessee. He says, at this point in the interview, all my big plans just kind of went out the window and she just caught a wind. She talked and sang as she talked, conjuring these clouds of memory music for 90 minutes straight. Reflecting on what happened as Parton recounted how she learned to play the guitar, how she was raised among the bear and the deer, how her family of 12 grew their own food and canned it for the winter, he said she'd gone into a state of mind that was very intoxicating to be around. Curious if other people had experienced this same phenomenon in the stories of Dolly Parton, he began to ask other fans if they'd had this same experience of what he called the Tennessee Mountain Trance. And so in the episode, he finds out that they do. And so they go to figure out what is this trance. So they go to the Great Smoky Mountains. They visit Dollywood. They interview Susan Harlan, an English professor from Wake Forest University who writes about souvenir culture, and she knows Dollywood well because she's visited there for part of her research. And Harlan notes that nostalgia drives the transfiguration that occurs in the stories of Dolly Parton. That Tennessee mountain home, that's what the brand is about, Harlan says. This huge empire with all its hotels and Splash Mountain and all this stuff, I really think comes out of this somewhat mournful, sad sense of a lost home. I mean, the word nostalgia, nostos in the Greek, is home, and algia is pain. A painful longing for home. Now, when I was listening to this, that sentence captivated me immediately, perhaps because I too come from a Tennessee mountain home. If you go into the Great Smoky Mountains National Park in the Greenbrier area, if you find the Porters Creek Trail, there's an unmarked service road. If you go about half a mile up that service road, you end up at a cemetery where you can find the headstones of my great-great-great-great-great-grandparents, William Whaley and Mary Ann Ogle. I've been there several times. I don't know anything about them except their birth year and their death year. But as I stand among those trees and see the broken stone fences that mark the boundaries of their farm, I get that painful ache for a home in those Tennessee mountains. Something idyllic, pure, some mysterious past of humanity and nature interwoven and interdependent. What's fascinating about those Tennessee mountains is they don't just speak to people who have ancestral ties there. Later in this episode of this podcast, Abumrad interviews Esther Konkara. Esther is a singer, a famous singer in Kenya. And what she's most known for is singing the songs of Dolly Parton, especially her hit, My Tennessee Mountain Home. Why? Konkara has no ties to the Tennessee mountains, though she did grow up in a hilly part of Kenya, and she was raised as a poor farmer. But what she says is in that song, Dolly is very vivid about the place. You can imagine this is how Tennessee looks, and you can just get this picture. The vivid imagery locks the moment into memory. Sitting on the front porch on a summer afternoon, in a straight-back chair on two legs leaned against the wall. Watch the kids a-playin' with June bugs on a string, and chase the glowing fireflies as the evening shadows fall. So vivid imagery, an idyllic moment of time that has been lost, where people in the land are held in perfect community and interdependence, where the earth seems infused with heaven, Imagery that when we hear it in our present moments, our hearts ache to return to a forgotten past that we never even lived. When the ancient Hebrew people told the story of God planting a garden, they too used vivid imagery of place. The dust formed into mud, and the breath of life filling the nostrils of the man, animating him into being. Rivers rising from the earth to water this garden, a grand procession of animals coming forward to be named, a helper formed as a partner. The depiction of Eden does to us the same thing that can be experienced in a Tennessee mountain home song. In fact, Dolly Parton's nostalgia is actually just pointing partway back to that painful ache for a home that is an interdependent community of people and plant and animal and God. This Genesis story we hear from Bible scholars is one of the oldest, maybe the oldest, in the entire Bible. It is at the core of what it means to be human. Our reading today concluded, and the man and his wife were both naked, and they were not ashamed. Now, it's easy to get distracted and snicker at the naked part, but don't miss the other part of that sentence. They were not ashamed. They were not yet separated from God, from one another, from the earth, from the other species of animals. For a moment, they were fully who God created them to be, the creature dependent on the Creator with a vocation to till the garden and bring it to harvest, to name the animals and thus carry responsibility for their well-being. Eden, the story of Eden, exists to prick our hearts with nostalgia, to create a painful longing for home. It's like Esther Konkara singing My Tennessee Mountain Home in Virginia, or in Kenya, for us to sing of Eden in Virginia. And that nostalgia creates this vision and this calling for a reconciled world where Eden might be seen again. And so in our time, we who are inheritors of this nostalgia, this Eden vision, our hearts ache when we read and hear the stories of a world that is so far away from that perfect moment in the distant past. We see images and we read stories like the one about the Great Pacific Garbage Patch. Do you know about this? There's actually two. There's one off the coast of California, another off the coast of Japan. They're hard to measure the size. Aerial images show them to be at least as much landmass as the state of Texas. This is all plastic waste that is collected there. Turtles swim in it and they eat plastic grocery bags, thinking that they're jellyfish, and they choke and die. Sperm whales ingest the plastic and end up beached on shorelines full of bottles and other waste. Albatross pick up little tiny flecks of plastic floating on the surface of the water, thinking it's food for their babies, and the babies can't digest it, and they die. And we hear that story, and something in us, ancient within us, remembers a time when our ancestors named those species and thus took responsibility for their life. We read the reports about the destruction of the rainforest. Amazon jungles burned and developed, wildfires destroying habitats of plants and animals. Brazil's government declares that about 20% of the Amazon rainforest has now been deforested. Scientists from outside of Brazil estimate that it's significantly higher a percentage than that. And in us stirs again this ancient memory of a vocation to till the soil and care for the lives of the plants. They're the stories of the poaching that take big game almost out of existence, the white rhino, the silverback gorilla, elephants hunted just for their tusks, dolphins corralled into coves where they're stripped of their dorsal fins and left to bleed out to death. The tides are rising. Storms are more powerful and prevalent. Coastal towns are making serious decisions about whether or not they have a viable future for the next 30 to 50 years. Each summer, we hear of larger wildfires in the western U.S. Pollution in the air leads to respiratory disease for those in smog areas. How can you read that? How can you see that? And our hearts not ache. Our greed, our neglect, our arrogance, our ignorance. We indeed live east of Eden. But we know where home is. And it's that knowledge that moves us to act. Repair of the globe and reconciliation in human relationships is a calling to make that primordial vision of Eden true once more. Our goal is different then than secular folks who want to take care of the planet just so that it can be a viable habitat for future generations. Our goal is much deeper and much more comprehensive. It's a goal to get back home. And so that's why you're here today. That's why we gather in these pews to pray and sing and speak of God. That's why we remember the lives of the saints who have passed and celebrate the lives of new saints among us. It's why we send out these pledge cards every fall and ask you to write down an amount of money that you're going to give to the mission of the church for the coming year, because we believe that transformation of the world doesn't happen by just some people trying to do some good. It takes a vision, a Tennessee mountain home, an Eden vision, where we live at peace with God and with each other and with the land and the creatures that God made in this world that God so loved that God entered it and died to redeem it. Scientific data, ecological warnings are fine, but unless they're connected to this painful longing for home, they struggle to alter our behavior or our lives. A vision of what was and what can be, and the aching heart that accompanies that picture. That is what moves us to real change. You may remember in the story of Jesus' resurrection, on the first Easter, Mary Magdalene stood outside the tomb. Jesus' body was missing. She stood there weeping because she didn't know where the body was. And John, the gospel writer, tells us that a stranger approaches and asks her why she's crying. And then he says, supposing him to be the gardener. Mary asks the risen Jesus where his body is because she mistakes him as the gardener. But does she really mistake him? For is he not that first gardener who planted Eden all those years before? Who is now making a world new, a new garden with the tree of life at its center, bearing its fruit in abundance for all people, and its leaves there for the healing of the nations. The gardener is healing the world and inviting all those who feel that ache for Eden in their bones to give their lives to him, to become fellow gardeners with him in the world, to discover once more a life that's as peaceful as a baby's sigh. Amen.